Hello, everybody. I'm back with another video in the Soul Winning series, and today I want to talk about different types or different styles, tactics of soul winning, whatever you want to call it. There's more than one type or a strategy to go about preaching the gospel, and these might be employed in different environments. So these include door-to-door soul winning, person-to-person soul winning, what I call selective soul winning, and also personal soul winning. I'll explain what each one of these is in this video. So, first of all, the most common and the most effective for reaching every creature is door to door soul winning. And this is what the church that I go to typically does. This is what most Baptist churches typically do. And like I said, it is the most effective way for reaching every creature, right? What do I mean by that? Well, the only real way to know that you've reached every person in a certain geographical area is by how many houses or apartments you knock, right? If you look on a map and there's 30 houses on that map and you knock every door, then well, this area is pretty much covered, right? Now, it's also a biblical way of doing it, right? Some people criticize door-to-door soul winning, but it's something that we see in the Bible. In Acts chapter 5, verse 42, for example, it says, daily in the temple and in every house, they cease not to teach and preach Jesus Christ, right? Now, we find that door-to-door soul winning is more effective in places like the US and Canada, places in the West, where people spend a lot of time at their house. And when they're out and about, they're either at work or they have some other kind of tasks to do, right? So doing these other types of soul winning that I'm about to mention are not as effective in the United States. They might be more effective on like missions trips and things like that. And I'll explain when to use them in a second. But you'll notice in Acts 5:42, it says in the temple and in every house, right? So it's not just going door to door, but you should preach the gospel in other environments as well. And that leads to the next one, person to person soul winning, which is basically instead of going from door to door, house to house, you go in like a public place from person to person, right? The soul winner approaches as many individuals as possible to preach the gospel. Now, this is good for going soul winning in a public place like parks, malls, universities, etc. And it's also good to utilize on foreign missions trips. For example, I recently went to St. Lucia, and we did person-to-person soul winning in a large park called Derek Walcott Square in downtown Castries. And we found that to be much more effective and much more receptive than going door to door, right? Because in certain other countries, more people are going to spend time in places like parks and malls, and they're going to be willing to talk. Versus like in the US, if you go to a mall and you try to preach the gospel, they're probably going to kick you out, number one. Number two, people are there to shop and they don't really want to talk, right? Versus in other places, people kind of just go there to hang out with their friends, so they don't really have anything else to do, right? And that's why it's a good strategy to use in foreign mission trips to talk to as many people as possible. But I also found it works sometimes also in universities. I've heard about examples of people going again to foreign universities mostly and preaching the gospel to students there and getting a lot of people saved, right? So person to person soul winning is effective in the sense that you could talk to more people in a shorter amount of time. But obviously, you don't know how many people in an area you're reaching because you might run into the same people again. You might not run into certain people at all in a geographical area who don't come out, right? And so that's why you should do this and door to door soul winning, right? It's not like one or the other. It's certain places and certain times might call for one, and certain places and certain times might call for another. Now, also, another way you can do person-to-person soul winning is with online soul winning, like on platforms like Omegle. If you've watched my channel, you know I've done soul winning on Omegle, which is basically a website online where you just chat with strangers and you just go from person to person. It connects with a random person also on the website, and you could just talk about whatever. You could talk about the Bible. And so I've been using that to reach people online as well. And because that's randomized, it technically is person to person. The only difference is it's behind a computer screen and not actually going out and talking to people face to face, right? So the third type of soul winning, which you could do, I call selective soul winning, and that's where you select or single out a particular demographic. Now, when would you use this? It's useful for places with multiple languages, right? So, like, for example, I have a friend who's from Lithuania, and I've talked about possibly going to Lithuania to preach the gospel. Haven't done it yet, but it would be cool to do that in the future. But he told me that pretty much only the young people speak English, right? I think like 38% of the entire population of Lithuania speaks English, but mostly younger people, people who are teenagers in their 20s. But the older people obviously only speak Lithuanian, right? So me as an English speaker who doesn't speak Lithuanian would not be able to preach to them. So if I did go, for example, to Lithuania, I would only speak to younger people because I can't speak to the other people. They speak Lithuanian. They don't understand me, right? Or another example would be we've had people go to places where there are a lot of Muslims. I've heard of people going on mission trips like this, and these Muslims are they're living in a Muslim country, right? And it's illegal to preach the gospel to them, right? Now, here's the thing: we ought to obey God rather than men, but we should also be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, as Jesus said, right? If there's people in that place that will be able to hear the gospel, and you can do it without any consequences, legal consequences, then it's better to just focus on them than to go to people who it's illegal to preach to. You know what I mean? We're not just trying to get arrested just for the sake of getting arrested. We want to actually reach people with the gospel. And so if there's people who will be able to listen, you should go to those people first. It's also useful on college campuses or other public places in the US or Canada. As I mentioned before, person-to-person soul winning you can do in very easily in foreign countries in places like parks and universities and malls, but it's a lot harder to do it in the United States. But selective soul winning might be easier to do in these sort of public places in the US if you just single out a person, for example, who is just sitting down doing nothing. So recently, me and some of my friends have been going soul winning on a particular private university in the Phoenix area. I won't say which, but we've been going on the campus, and my friends are students there, so it's not like we're just infiltrating or whatever, but my friends are students there. It would be going onto the campus and speaking to people who are just sitting down, basically doing nothing, just on their phone, just, finishing up their lunch or whatever, because there's a lot of people on campus who are busy just walking from class to class, or they're in big groups, people who wouldn't have the time to hear it, right? So we instead decide to focus our efforts on preaching to people who don't have anything else going on or just sitting by themselves. We just go up to them and talk to them, and we found it is very effective and it's very receptive like that. So selective soul winning would just be like singling out a particular group of people or a particular demographic. And then lastly, another type of soul winning could do is just personal life soul winning. You can share the gospel in your personal life, one person at a time, right? This would not be like actually having a set time where you go out and talk to a bunch of people, but just like, just whenever you talk to your friends, you talk to your family, you talk to your coworkers about the gospel. Whenever you're alone with them, whenever you have the time to speak to them about it, you preach them the gospel, right? And that's something that obviously a lot of Christians will try to do, but we should not only do this type of soul winning. Like I said, you should try to do door to door, and you should try to do person to person, because that way you will be able to speak to strangers as well, right? Not everybody is your friend. Not everybody is in your family. Not everybody works at your job. If you only preach to these people, you're only going to get, a handful of people saved in your whole life. So it's good to preach to strangers as well, because Jesus said, preach the gospel to every creature. So these are different styles, different tactics of soul winning. Again, each one is good. Each one you can use in different places, different environments, and they all have their use. They all have their reason behind it. So you should try to go door to door. You should try to go person to person in certain areas. Do selective soul winning in certain areas, certain times. And you should do personal life soul winning as well. Witness people who you already know, who are not strangers, right? That should be easier, actually. So, thank you, everybody, for watching.